From Moment to Movement with Tamara Banks has been made possible through the generous support of the Anchor Point Foundation, helping nonprofit organizations and leaders creatively solve problems in their communities around the world.
Racism is steeped into the very core of this country. And now, in 2020, Black voices are tired of being ignored, muffled, and killed. Millions of Americans are demonstrating, protesting to make their voices heard, especially Black Americans. A movement has to arise from the ashes of the moment. From Moment to Movement is a series of one-on-one truth-telling conversations with the Black community, aimed at working towards addressing police brutality and changing systemic racism. Hi, I'm Tamara Banks, your host for From Moment to Movement, a platform for Black voices to be heard, unfiltered and uncensored. Let's be real, it's not always easy to have honest conversations about police brutality and systemic racism. From Moment to Movement aims to provide a unique platform for Black voices to be heard. Now, while it's not the Black community's responsibility to educate white people, From Moment to Movement will provide information about resources for white community members who want to learn how to engage in thoughtful, respectful conversations with African Americans. What you're about to hear are passionate, authentic feelings and real-life stories. In this episode, you'll hear from a political director who is working to make sure that everyone in the Black community who is eligible to vote is registered, a former journalist, and a woman who survived the 1963 Birmingham church bombing. Our first guest is Hashim Coates, who shares his thoughts on being Black in America. Hashim, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me here, Tamara.
Now, Hashim, I know you work on a lot of big campaigns there in the state of Colorado. I think a lot of folks historically in the Black community, and maybe even especially now, feel like voting really doesn't matter, doesn't change things. Getting politically engaged is not the route to go. What would you say, given your experience, to that sort of mentality?
I would definitely say that they are wrong. I can understand the feeling that is. I can understand where they feel that way, but I definitely would say they're wrong. The facts are out there that show that voting is one of the mechanisms to change, and it is one of the mechanisms that those who are standing against Black progress fear the most. And you can look at that based upon the legislation that has had to occur behind Black people having the right to vote, the suppression once we got the right to vote, and the amount of money that has been thrown in against restricting and making the vote small.
Right. And we talk about voter suppression. A lot of folks don't realize it's happening today.
Yes.
I live in Atlanta, and of course, Stacey Abrams' work around voter suppression, getting out the vote. Can you give some evidence that voting does really matter and getting politically engaged does count?
So the anecdotal evidence, I'm so sorry, I don't have like that type of information on hand, but you can look at the fight, but we can use Stacey Abrams' race, the fight that was going on to certify the votes and how things escalate quickly into the courts when there has to be rulings on what counts and what doesn't count. You can look at the closing of polling locations. When you go from 600 polling locations open down to the double digits, the low double digits, the teens or the 20s, for me, that's evidence of something is going on. Why don't they want these people to vote? If we talk about civil liberties and patriotism, voting is one of those things, but why restrict people on voting if that is a way of them showing their patriotism, right? So I kind of like solve for X. Voting has to be important because these forces that have been historically against me don't want me to utilize my right to vote.
Right. Right. And I think that that's just another, in my opinion, another form of oppression to
Yes.
not exercise your right to vote. So I just wanted to give people a bit of background of what you do and how
Okay.
you're committed to that effort. Um, and moving forward in the conversation, I think about you know, many Black men in particular and having their skin weaponized against them. When you see and hear the news stories about George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and there in Denver, Elijah McClain,
Hmm.
what actually goes through your head? What are you thinking at this moment in time?
I'm thinking things don't change. Um, and I'm thinking that things change at the same time. As a child, I would watch Eyes on the Prize because I would come on every February during Black History Month. It would come on and I'd watch it. I'm like, wow, I wish I could have grown up where I was a part of something like that. Then I blink and here I am, a full grown adult. Um, and things are just like that. I mean, except for we have the right to vote and the tactics have changed. But when I think about these people who unknowingly sacrifice their lives for us to have progress, I thank them for that debt. At the same time, I have sympathy and empathy for their families. Um, but I get encouraged, and then at the same time, I get depressed because I feel that even since those incidents have happened, and I feel like even since those incidents have happened, we still have had Black deaths, Black murders at the hands of these systemic institutions. But one thing I like about George Floyd, and it's his past. It is his checkered past. So even though his skin was actually a part of the factor that caused him to be murdered by police officers, but it's the past of the fact that he was not this lily white persona. And with his unwilling sacrifice, he began to set the wheel in motion of changing the world and making people pay attention.
Hmm. Say more about why that's important. The fact that he wasn't white to move this needle forward and take us out of this moment and into a more of a movement.
Gotcha. So it's more so not like for his race being his. Well, it's important that because he's not white, because the issue probably would have been swept under the rug. But when I say the whiteness, like the lily white, the clean sheet of his past, that he had some other arrests and some convictions on his record. When we look at the story of Rosa Parks, you know, Rosa Parks was not the first Black person to refuse to give up her seat or their seat on the bus. There was an issue before, and my God, like my parents would be so ashamed. The name slips me. Of the woman that happened before, right? She was a darker skinned Black woman. She had a couple of children out of wedlock. And I want to say that she might have had a misdemeanor on her record, but the NAACP and the Black leadership at that time, and the leadership at that time chose not to use her as the example to go forward, but they chose Rosa Parks, who was this woman, this pristine background, formally educated, good job, and skin complexion also I really played a factor in that. So George was not that, and that's kind of like I can appreciate that.
No, I get that. That's a very good point because most of the time, and I think you mentioned this before, that well, he had. I know as a reporter, sometimes my editorial and producers staff was saying, well, they had a criminal record. So
So what?
what?
So
Like,
what?
what does that have to do with it? And so there's been pushback that has failed, I think, largely by the argument on the other side that says, well, he was he had a alleged
A
fake
counterfeit.
$20
Yes.
bill, counterfeit bill, and then he had these other records and maybe had drugs in his system and all of this, all of that to that day had been okay to say, well, then he probably kind of deserved it. But what I hear you saying is, no, he didn't deserve it, and he wasn't perfect, and so that's what
Right.
makes it wrong.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what I'm saying. And I really wish that the media and society would focus more on that. Let's say, because the counterfeit money is something that is completely alleged because it hasn't been proven. But
Right.
even if it was $20, even back during the time of legal chattel slavery, a black man's life was worth more than $20.
Right.
Right. So to ever use that as justification really makes me question the logic and the ethics of the person that wants to use that. But if we rewind time and I was thinking about these shootings, the black man that was shot in his own home in Dallas, right? Like in his own home, they tried to say, well, he had marijuana in there. Well, that's fine, but it wasn't even a warrant or a drug raid that was going on, still wouldn't have justified it. But they grasp at every little thing to use to make it okay because we aren't these these people of society with these lily white backgrounds that are completely submissive and subservient to white supremacy.
Right, right. And, you know, there's always been this, like you said, well, they probably had something going on. He had marijuana in his house. All that said, what does a young man who is going to the convenience store having his background that you're going to respond with aggression when somebody says he looks suspicious for wearing a mask, which we're all supposed to be doing right now during a pandemic? And then even let's just go beyond that. Now you're taking selfies at the crime scene, because I can see a defense attorney up to that point saying, well, they didn't know what they were coming up on. They didn't know if a person was using the mask to keep themselves healthy and safe or to commit a crime, you know, whatever kind of craziness. But when you take it to the point when you have, after the scene is over, now you're taking selfies at the crime scene and then circulating them. I guarantee that wasn't the first time.
No, it wasn't the first time, right? And sadly, it won't be the last time. And I'm not law school trained, but for me, that would help support malicious intent. And it would highlight the culture of the Aurora Police Department, which ties into the culture of every single police department here in America. So when they say that 140-pound 23-year-old was too much for 3 trained police officers who weighed considerably more than him individually, but collectively, they could not control him. And then they thought it was okay for the EMT to show up and inject him with an over the limit type of sedative. Sounds like murder to me.
Right. So here's the thing, and you've expressed this and so have I. This isn't the first time that we've seen cases like this, but it's the first time where we've seen so many people of not color, so many white folks join us on the front lines, whether it be rallies, demonstrations, what have you, writing their congressperson, be it on a state or national level. Is there something different happening here that we have maybe never seen or haven't seen since the 60s?
I think that this moment was equivalent to the Edmund Pettus Bridge moment when it happened to get caught on TV. So technology, I think, has a part to play. But I also think that, as I affectionately referred to, the orange piece of phlegm in the White House, that his behavior and the behavior of his cronies and flunkies has kind of helped set the tone in America, where it's like, okay, I guess Black people were right about something. And yeah, this is pretty bad. So all of that has been a contributing factor to this movement, because if you've been paying attention, these uprisings should have happened. Cities should have burned long time ago, before you and I were even born, because since 1619, we'll use that as a date for reference, Black lives have only been valued as property, but have always been targeted and viewed as expendable. So it's a long time overdue, and I guess people are just sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like so where you been all this time, right? So,
And I think one other thing, I think we have these agent provocateurs that were involved. And I think kind of their things have backplayed or have backfired, I should say, on them. Because I think it gathered attention and you have more people, black, white, brown, yellow, whatever, are paying attention and reading and studying history. So when these type of moments happen and civil unrest occurs, and you look at how revolutions are begun, I think things spun out of control from what they wanted. And I'm kind of happy for it. So.
Mm-hmm. So now, what would you say to the white allies now who don't really know what to do or what to say, but they do want to get engaged?
I would say reach out. Okay, first I would say view Black lives the same way that you view white lives, right? If you would be offended if something happened to your white child, grandchild, niece, nephew, or self, be offended when you see that type of action happening to a Black person. Reminds me of The Time to Kill when Matthew McConaughey had the jury close their eyes and gave the descriptive details of what happened to the little Black girl and told them, now imagine if she was white. I need white allies to do that. I also need them to understand that just using a hashtag is not enough. Just putting a sign up in your front yard, especially close to your front porch, so those passing by may or may not see it, is not enough. What they can do is that they can reach out to Black community groups, some of the old traditional groups like the Urban League, NAACP or NAACP, or they can reach out to some of the newer groups, right? Those that work underneath the name Black Lives Matter, or they're those in politics or those that trust, and I'm not all Black is good Black, right? There's some Black that's spelled with a capital B and some Black that's spelled with a small b. But ask the friends, but also don't have an expectation that labor should be free coming from these Black sources. And they can also study. I mean, there's books out there. Buy the books by the Black authors that talk about racism and talk about anti-racism and talking about what to do in the movement, because that's another way of fighting white supremacy as well, is not going to sources like Tim Wise, right? And right. Tim Wise will tell you in person, and anything that he does, all he's doing is standing up here telling you things that Black women and Black people have been telling you for years. But yet he's rich off of that. But yet we won't give that type of money to the Ta-Nehisi Coateses, to the Ava DuVernays, to the Bell Hooks. Like, we won't give them that money, but we will give that type of money to people like Tim Wise.
Mm-hmm. So there is some ownership on our end in terms of buying products and reading books and going to films that are produced and developed by Black folks and putting our money where our mouth is. There's value in that.
Yes, the FUBU mentality, right? For us,
that's
by
right.
us.
That's
yes.
right. Right. Hashim Coates, community activist, smart dude. And I really appreciate your time and insight. This program here on PBS is to elevate Black voices, and you've given us something to think about, and we appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's right, Hashim. A sign in your front yard is not enough. Rallies and protests are not enough. Get involved with Black Lives Matter. Buy and read books by Black authors. Get engaged. Get informed. Our next guest worked at a number of big city newspapers. She shares a story about how her 16-year-old son was racially profiled in their own townhouse complex. April is a former journalist. She used to work for the Dallas Morning News, the Rocky Mountain News, and an all-around great journalist. And she currently lives in Atlanta, working in the communication and public relations space. April, thanks for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this conversation.
You bet. So listen, you live in Atlanta, and happening over the past couple of weeks, and most recently, the governor has deployed or is about to deploy 1,000 troops, military troops, throughout the city in specific areas, actually. And what he's saying is to protect buildings that belong to the state. The State Patrol Office was burned and damaged not too long ago. And so he's using this to say he's protecting the buildings. But what that also does when you deploy troops is that allows them freedom to move about the city in certain neighborhoods. I'd like to get your thoughts and feelings about that decision.
I think it's an unfortunate decision in many ways. Yes, there's been some damage and there's been some looting. But, like Martin Luther King said, looting is a form of people just trying to be heard. I mean, a lot of the damage and looting hasn't been done by the protesters. It's been done by different agitators who have joined in on the protest just to create problems. But I think what is the real impetus for what the governor is doing is over the weekend in Stone Mountain, a group of African Americans protest, and they came out in military gear and armed, just like we've seen white protesters do at the state capitol in Michigan when they stormed the state capitol with guns. Well, this group came out in, like I said, in military gear and was carrying, assault weapons and assault rifles, exercising their Second Amendment rights, just like anybody else. And then that became an impetus for the governor to deploy 1,000 troops. I don't think it's necessarily the buildings. I think it was the fear of seeing armed Black people.
Well, I think it's important to note that, and first of all, for people who don't know where Stone Mountain is in relation to Atlanta, it's probably 20 minutes south of Atlanta. And it was a Klan headquarters for the state of Georgia, right?
It was a Klan headquarters for the state of Georgia. It is where Confederate heroes are carved into the side of the Stone Mountain, just like, some of the presidents are carved into the mountain in South Dakota at Mount Rushmore. Was a similar kind of mountain where Confederate soldiers Confederate leaders like General Lee and so forth are Jefferson Davis. They're carved into the mountainside.
I want to ask about your son and the fact that he's a young a boy now, but he's soon to be a young man, and your concerns around that. But let's talk a little bit about the Confederate statues throughout the state. We're talking about Georgia, but really throughout the country. Some would argue that hey, this is heritage. These were my people. They deserve to stay up, and the flag, represents something that my family was proud of. What say you?
Well, let me say two things. Let me talk about Governor Kemp really quick again. Here's the irony of Governor Kemp, what he's doing because he saw armed Black people protesting in Stone Mountain. Governor Kemp ran an offensive ad, as far as I'm concerned, regarding when he was running for governor, and he was brandishing a gun and talking about how he's going to keep the immigrants out. So there's the irony of that. It's okay for him to brandish guns in a TV ad. It's okay for him to do all of that. But the irony is, it's not okay for African Americans to exercise their Second Amendment rights in an open carry state. So that's the irony there. When it comes to my heritage, one man's heritage is another man's oppression and subjugation. So a lot of these monuments were not put up after the Civil War. They were put up during the Jim Crow era to remind Black people that the South is still Confederate South. You are still going to be subjugated. You're still going to be treated like second-class citizens. And all through Jim Crow, there was segregation. There was no separate but equal. They had nice pools. You swam in a pond. They went to nice schools. You went to a one-room school, building made up, built with siding and plywood. They had better books. You had inferior books. So that heritage, the statues, the flag, the Confederate flag, those were meant to remind Black people, particularly in the South, where their place was, and to remind Black folks in the South that you are still in the South, where we're going to subjugate you and we're going to oppress you by any means necessary.
Well,
And
and it's important to note that most of those statues were not erected right after the Civil War. It wasn't
no,
until the Jim Crow era. And
correct.
so to talk about, well, I had relatives that fought for the war and that was erected in the 1800s. No, actually, it was more like the 1900s. And so, to your point, it was to send a very clear message
Right.
about the North may have won the
Correct.
war, but the South won the argument,
They won the
meaning,
argument, they won the battle because then they had a number of, congressional, very powerful congressmen, senators who actually um, continue to put laws in place and continue to support laws that would subjugate African Americans in this country.
mhm,
They would continue to support actions and laws that would allow Black people to be lynched in this country, and there would be nobody brought to justice for it. You had Medgar Evers shot. No one was brought to justice for it for almost 20 something years.
right,
You've had those laws and the symbols and their statues and their rituals were meant to put the fear into African Americans. Also, then you have the KKK, who also was a terrorist group as far as I'm concerned, went around across the South burning crosses to remind Black people that they were going to be subjugated. Ida B. Wells wrote and showed the world and revealed to the world that 5,000 Black men had been lynched during the Jim Crow era. So, and she brought attention to that by bringing attention to that overseas, which brought and bared pressure on the United States.
right.
So
So,
so there's a lot of dark history. I mean, you can whitewash history. The attempt is to marginalize and whitewash history and make it look like these were heroes who fought valiantly in the Civil War. Well, they were actually traitors to their country, and they were trying to succeed from the Union, and there was a great deal of insurrection.
so here we are in 2020, and now a lot of this history is becoming reality. We've had, you know, almost 300 years to figure out the history. Why now? What's different about this moment in time where people are ready to march arm in arm with Black and brown folks?
I think what's this moment in time is you have a different generation who's saying we're just not going to take it anymore. While you and I were the children of the civil rights movement, while we benefited from integration, we were just focused on building a life for ourselves, building a career for ourselves, and trying to assimilate into our workplaces, into corporate America. This generation, what is laid bare is the pandemic gave them plenty of time to see the ills that are and the ills of America. Is laid bare our racial divisions. Is laid bare our the injustices, police brutality. It is laid bare before all of us that we are not we're still trying to reach the better selves and find our better angels in America, and that African Americans and people of color, Latinos, who are disproportionately incarcerated, disproportionately brutalized by the police, disproportionately killed by the police. I think that was the moment in time. But watching George Floyd lay on the ground and be basically killed and choked out by the officer's knee, that was a bridge way too far. I mean, because you actually got to see a modern day lynching.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And America finally was able to see what Black people have been saying has been going on, and the treatment they've been receiving and at the hands of the police for decades.
Right, right. And so when you see George Floyd, or you see Ahmaud Arbery and Trayvon Martin, I mean, the list is sadly
Like
way too
Michael
long to live,
Brown.
Michael Brown. And you see your own young son, who is now 17. He goes
Yes.
out the door. What goes through your mind? What do you embark about? What do you tell him about before he leaves the house?
You know, before he leaves the house, and what goes through my mind, I want him to come home safe, and I don't want him to, get in any trouble. I wanted him to, hang out with people who aren't going to get you in trouble and so forth. But when he leaves the house, it angers you as a mother that the fact that you have to tell your son, if you get stopped by the police, you say yes or no, sir. You keep your hands to your side or where they can see it at all times. You be as respectful as possible. Do not agitate the police officer. Do not talk back. And that's hard for teenagers because all they do is talk back. All they do is push back or rebel and try to push their independence. So that's when you're learning how to drive and you get stopped by police, keep your hands in front at 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or keep your hands up at the top of the wheel. Don't make any sudden moves. If they ask you for something, let them know you're going to grab just your ID or the car registration or so forth. And it angers me that I have to say that to my son, and white people don't have to prepare their children to go out and live in the world like that.
It's not just police, and of course, we're not talking about all police officers,
Sure.
but clearly, it's rampant. It's not just the 1%, and it's the infrastructure of the many police departments, but it's also the community at large. Talk about the issue when your son, who needed to charge his phone, was in his own neighborhood and was trying to use an outdoor outlet to charge up his phone.
Yes, we've had many moments in my own neighborhood. So we live in a pretty affluent neighborhood in Georgia. It's called the Vining Smyrna area. So my son went to the mailbox. It was the middle of the day. It's about 1 p.m. to go get the mail. And like most, brain dead teenagers, he took his phone. He carries a cord and a charger in his charger box in his pocket to keep his phone charged because they never keep their phone charged. So he went to the mailbox to get the mail. His phone was running low. He sat down. There's a utility box right next to the mailbox. He plugged it into the utility box. Not 10 minutes while he was doing that, one of my neighbors calls the police, says a young black kid is sitting by the mailbox. So his skin is obviously a weapon. So after that incident, so the police brought him home and said, hey, just keep an eye on your kid. The police were really good about it. They didn't harm him anyway. But when the police were rolling up, my heart dropped to my feet because anything could have happened to him. In one false move with that cell phone, and he could have been dead. Like the young kid in Oakland, California, he was sitting in his backyard and the police killed him while he was on the cell phone in his backyard. Right. That's the kind of thing you have to worry about. So when that situation happened, I went onto our community Facebook, and I'll be honest, I started my letter, Dear White People, please stop endangering our children. I wrote a letter and said that my son was sitting by the mailbox. He lives in this neighborhood. And what you did could have cost him his life. It's not a simple phone call if you call the police when it's a white kid involved, but when it's a black kid, it can literally cost him his life. I have to say, after I wrote that letter, and in that my response, I let him know. And I think you have to do a good job of when you're writing and telling people how you feel about something, you have to let them see your humanity and your children's humanity. And they have to buy into your humanity. So I wrote the letter and I said, I love my son just as much as you love your children. I want my son to live a long life. I want my son to grow up and be successful and be happy, get married, have children, and have all the rights and privileges any other American has. That's what I wrote in the letter, and I let them know that what you did could have cost him his life because one, wrong move with that cell phone. If the police were, had any apprehensions or thought he had any kind of weapon in his hands, he may not be here today. And when all he was doing was charging his cell phone. I have to say my neighbor was really good. She came out of the shadows. She apologized. She said she didn't realize that he lived in the neighborhood. She didn't realize that what she was doing could be so harmful to, his very life and his very existence. And then our community had a very robust conversation about racial profiling in our neighborhood, which had been going on. A lot of my other neighbors, Black neighbors, came out and had similar conversations about racial profiling their boyfriends, racial profiling their guests, and so forth. So we encourage the community to get to know each other, to get to know their neighbors, to get to know the kids in the neighborhood. And we started having pool parties and block parties so people can get to know each other.
That's great. That is really awesome. And that's, at the end of the day, it has to start at the community level, the neighbor to neighbor level, because we can't always obviously rely on the leadership and the law of the land. April Washington, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you imparting your knowledge and your wisdom and your experiences with us here on From Moment to Movement. You stay safe out there, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you. Love this show.
Great advice, April. White community, think of your child when you see a Black child and treat them the way you would want your child to be treated. I'm honored to introduce our next guest. One day in 1963, when she was just a little girl, her entire life changed in a matter of minutes. Our guest today is Sarah Collins Rudolph. She survived the 1963 church bombing in Birmingham that killed her sister and 3 other little girls. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. It's truly an honor to know you and to have you on our program today. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sarah, let me just kind of set the tone, or have you set the tone for us on that morning as we look back 50 some odd years later now. And I don't know about you, but when I was a little girl and my mom got me dressed up and ready for church, I mean, we were decked out in little dresses and shoes and maybe a matching little hat. What did you do that morning to get ready for church? Do you remember?
Yes, that morning was going to be a youth day, Sunday, and we was going to sing in the choir. So we was getting ready for that Sunday, and we had choir rolls hanging in the choir room, so we was gonna put them on that Sunday.
Nice. That sounds like it was beautiful. Now, did you walk to church, or how do you get to church back then?
Yeah, we walked. It was my sister Jane, Ed, and I. We walked all the way to church.
Oh, wow. How far was that?
It was about a mile.
Okay, not too far, not too far. So you walk in, and what was happening when you first got there? Was the choir singing? Was there prayer right away? What did it feel like at that very beginning moments of church service?
Well, when we arrived at church, they was already having Sunday school that morning. So what we did, since we was late, we just stayed in the ladies' lounge and was waiting for church to start.
Mm-hmm. And so, tell me then about the moment that things changed in your life, and you heard what you later would learn was an explosion. What led up to that, and what was happening?
Well, that morning, while I was looking out the doorway for class to turn out, that's when I seen Denise McNair, Cynthia West, and Carol Robinson. They walked into the lounge where Ed and I were, and they spoke to us and went on to the other side where the stalls. And when they came out, Denise walked over to Ed and asked her to tie the sash on her dress. And I remember how when she turned around and Ed reach out to Tad to say, that's when I heard this loud noise, boom. And I didn't know what it was. All I can do was say, Jesus. And then Addie, but she didn't answer. So I didn't know what it was until I heard someone holler out, somebody bombed the 16th Street Church. And their voice was so clear as though they was in there with us. But right where Addie and the girls were standing, it blew a big hole in the church. And a man came in and got me out. His name was Samuel Rutledge.
So somebody came and pulled you out, one of the adults in the congregation did he pull you out of the debris and the rubble?
No, since I was blinded from the debris, he told me later on, in the years when I began to go around to the library, and he seen me because he stayed right across the street from the library, and he told me that. He asked me, did I know who he were? So I said no. He said his name was Samuel Rutledge. He was the one that came in and picked me up and carried me out to the ambulance.
Remind me how old you were, Sarah.
Well, I got hurt at the age of 12.
And you said you lost your sight but you lost your eye,
Yes,
right?
Debris came entered into both of my eyes, but I was able to see out of my left eye, but I lost my right eye, and they had to remove it.
And you also lost your sister.
Yes. I found out when that when they came out, when I came out of recovery, and they put me in my room. My mother was upstairs waiting on me. I didn't know what had happened to them since I had got blinded, but she told me that all the girls that was in the ladies' lounge with me, they was all killed. I was the only survivor.
Oh,
That's why they killed those girls.
wow. How did I mean, it's such a silly question, but how did your heart feel? How did you cope with that?
Well, for one thing, I was angry because these were some sweet girls and they was killed for nothing. So for a long time, I was just angry and hurt because my sister and I, we was very close. We was our friends, and it just hurt me for a long time because after I got out the hospital, they let me go back to school. The next week, I was in the hospital a couple of months, and instead of them helping me trying to get back on my feet, I had to go back to school. And when I went back to school, I was in a very nervous condition.
Oh, I bet. So you were in the hospital for several weeks, a couple months, I think you said, and then they made you go back to school with no sort of support system, it sounds like.
No, they didn't counsel me or anything, and nervous and upset, and my grades dropped, and they just didn't realize what a bomb did to me. And like I said, my grades had drops, and all I could think about was that day and my sister, getting killed like that.
Wow, you're just a little girl. So Sarah, you use the past tense of are. You said you were angry. So you're not angry anymore? Tell me about that.
No, I had to get prayer, and I had to go back and just think about it. I didn't want to continue to feel that way. I was getting to the point where I was acting just like the plans, just angry at the white people. And I didn't want to continue my life like that. So what I did, I had to start reading the Bible and start getting close to God. That's when God began to take all that hate out of me, because something like that, I didn't know how to cope with it. So I just started hating them just like they did us. But God,
Well, I'm sorry for interrupting. I was just going to say that that's huge to go from, first of all, recognizing that you were as hate-filled as the Klan was and the white supremacists who did this to you, and then you did an about face, a 180, and you came around and now through God and Christianity, and you said, I think you said reading the Bible and lots of prayer, you went 180, and now you're not holding that anger anymore. Is that right?
right, because I hold it for a long time. I think until I had got 40, 43. It didn't take it. It wasn't overnight. Now, like 2 weeks, I got my life straight. It took some time because I was hurt for a long time.
Mhm. That's a huge testimony, and if I can bring us forward to 2020, and I'm when you see or hear the news reports today of specifically police brutality, unarmed Black people being killed at the hands of police officers specifically, but then also generally speaking, racism in America and systemic racism. Did you ever think back in 1963, coming forward to 2020, that we would be in this same spot?
No, I didn't. I never did think that we would be here today, because we was fighting for our civil rights at that time. And when they signed the civil rights bill, I really thought things would change, but we back in the same uh, spot again. And it's just wrong the way we have been treated as Black people that did no harm, you know. So time has gone back.
Have you seen the video of George Floyd's killing?
Yes, I seen that, and I just couldn't do nothing but just cry when I seen that, because it was wrong. This man didn't do anything for them to heal him that way. So it just took me back to how things were in the city of Birmingham. We had a lot of angry police, and Bull Connor put the police on the marches, and it just took me back.
There seems to be similar kind of anger today in 2020. I don't know what party affiliation that you're in, and I don't want to speak for you, but I will think that most people can agree that there's something happening with a leadership in the country where there's a sense of anger that's being stoked by um, the White House, that it's more divisive and pulling people apart than bringing people together. Do you feel that?
Yes, I've been feeling it for a long time. We have a person in in office now that don't Black lives don't matter to him, as though he's in other words, he's just a racist to me. When Trump said he want America great again, America is already great. But I feel like that when he say that, he wants to make America white again, because that's what we was going through with in the 60s. How the whites didn't want us to have our civil rights. So since we got our civil rights and began to prosper, look like they want to send us back to that same old way again. So it's not right. Our president should be for all the people.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your story. I hope that people across America look to you as an example of what can be, what positive can happen from what's going on in the world. And so appreciate your efforts and being here and sharing your story, because, I wanted to start our interview with this and say that to ask you to tell your story is not to try to re-traumatize you, but I know you like to be able to share your story so other people can learn from it. So we're truly grateful that you did that. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you for setting an example of how important it is to forgive even the most egregious act. Your journey is an inspiration to all of us. Now, it's clear that the divisive national debate on race relations is at a boiling point. Systemic racism can no longer be swept under the rug. Just like an untreated cancer, it will continue to grow and eventually consume all of us. Let's tackle it head on. One place to start is to join us right here on From Moment to Movement. Listen, learn, engage. I hope something you heard inspired you and moved you into action. Keep the conversation going with us by going to From Moment to Movement at pbs12.org, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on my website, tamarambbanks.com. We'll see you next time.
From Moment to Movement with Tamara Banks has been made possible through the generous support of the Anchor Point Foundation, helping nonprofit organizations and leaders creatively solve problems in their communities around the world.